I turned to American version of Cải which is musical theater. And eventually, 17 years later, I ended up in Vietnam again, was hoping to put up a Cải live performance, which is Trọng Thủy Mỹ Châu, which ended up in the film. But then Cải was already fading, a fading art in Vietnam. And that's when I started turning to the idea of turning Song Lang into a film, because I feel like with that medium, at least it will always be there, and it will reach a much wider audience, especially international audience. Otherwise, if it's a live performance, once it's done, it evaporates, it's disappear. Not to mention with the state of Cải at the time, I know that even though if we willing to invest our time financially, I was willing to take a loss. I know that I would not able to achieve artistically what I was aiming for. And so becoming a filmmaker is kind of by chance, and it was Cải who led me to make this project in the first place. So yeah, so that's the story, that's the backstory of how Song Lang happened.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to have some questions about Cải Lương, the art form, coming up, but perhaps maybe now is a good time to start opening things up to the panel itself.
So, yeah, first off, what a beautiful film, and it's such a rich film to engage with. So thank you for being here. I wanted to say, as I watched the film, I couldn't help but sit with three texts, two of them film, one theatrical, Wong Kar-wai's Happy Together, Chen Kaiga's Farewell My Concubine, and David Henry Wang's In Butterfly. And I wondered if these are, you know, theatrical cinematic texts that you were thinking through as you wrote this script, or emerged as you were shooting, or now that you've released this film, I'm sure other critics, not me, not being original here, have also, you know, positioned your film against those three texts. So I wondered if you have something to say about either similarities or what you wanted to do differently than maybe those two films and that theater piece.
Yes, definitely. From all of my my film work, you can see the influence by Wong Kar-wai aesthetic, I should say. But one thing that I think that's different for me, with in terms of you know, in being influenced by Wong Kar-wai, as I will always tell my friends that when they're like, oh my gosh, why everything you do is like Wong Kar-wai? But I feel as if I've always liked things and think about things like Wong Kar-wai's film. And it just so happened that when I discovered his films, it matches my aesthetic, that what I like. Not that I found his film and then I discovered my aesthetic. Ever since I was a child, I was always in love with story of longing. I was always in love with the question, what if? Things that never complete, things that I don't have the full answer for. Those are the things that haunts me the most. And those just happen to be the themes that Wong Kar-wai's film also focuses on. And so when I find those, it clicked for me. I always love things that old. If you come to my house, you know, it looks like a antique store, or like a a vintage store because I like things that have story. I like broken things. I like things that falling apart. I like chip walls. I like old Chinatown. So those are things that I've always drawn to. So it's not that that through Wong Kar-wai I found what I like. With that said, with the similarity between Song Lang and Wong Kar-wai's film in terms of the visual, Vietnam, that's how it looks in the 80s. It just happened to look like Hong Kong, you know, because we didn't, those are the real walls that we use. Those are the real buildings that we, you know, turn into Jung's apartment. So it's not like we build a set trying to make it look like In the Mood for Love. That's how Vietnam is, especially the part that we use for the film. You know, in terms of the similarity between Song Lang and Farewell My Concubine, when the film premiered in Hong Kong as well as in Beijing, I was really interested to see what the Chinese audience would feel about a film, because one of the comparison I hear the most about, like, oh my gosh, this film is a remake of Farewell My Concubine, is from the audience in Vietnam, which I thought it was very interesting because Farewell My Concubine was never the inspiration for Song Lang. If anything, it's more Happy Together. Because if we look closely, the story is completely different than Farewell My Concubine. The only similarity is a two male lead that take place with, you know, Cải Lương versus Peking opera as the background of the story. But the two films are completely different. Ling Feng, he's not a Peking opera performer. He doesn't perform female's role. He does not fall in love with his partner on stage. He is not confused about who he is as the character or as a person. He doesn't fall in love with his scene partner because he was so disappear into the part that he was playing on stage. And not to mention, you know, Farewell My Concubine is a gigantic film. It spanned out through the whole cultural revolution, and it spanned out through the whole from childhood to adulthood of the lead characters. And there's a love triangle with Gong Li. There's a lot of politics involved. So I don't see any similarity at all, besides the fact that, you know, I understand because probably it's the aesthetic and it's the backstage and Cải Lương, especially period costume Cải Lương. It's kind of remind people of Peking opera because of the costume, but actually the makeup is completely different. And if you know Cải Lương and you look closely, Cải Lương costume is very much different than Peking opera costume as well. Yes, I do get those questions all the time. And to go back to what I mentioned earlier, when the film premiered in Hong Kong and Beijing, I was very interested to see what the audience reaction are, but they were the one that said, like, oh, well, we don't see the differences, and we don't see the familiar. We don't think it's the same film at all, because I was like, oh, well, Chinese audience, they've seen Wong Kar-wai, they've seen all this film. Maybe they're not gonna find this film interesting, but they're like, well, we actually see Vietnam in it, which I don't understand why they would see it like that, because even I look at the film and say, oh, well, this does look like Hong Kong in the 80s, in the 70s. So Yeah, so yes, I do get that question a lot, and it's mostly from Vietnamese audience.
Interesting, thank you, thank you.
Hi, yeah, it was really, really interesting for me to hear this conversation because, you know, I am a Chinese audience member, and I'm such a fan of your films, and not only Salam, but also Down and Talking to Your Mother. I thought that, you know, these films are intricately made. The narratives are very, very interesting and suspenseful, and also just warm and gentle, even though there are all these brutality in the film. And I also didn't think this film was a Chinese, I also felt like this was very, for me, it was very new. And at the same time, I also thought, while I was watching it, I just thought, we really need to think about trans-Asian cinema, because we have similar experiences. Wang Kai-wai leaving the mainland, going to Hong Kong as a refugee. And Hong Kong, and I think Hui Tam Tai, I think in the Q&A was talking about Vietnam in the 80s looked like Hong Kong in the 60s. Both these regions have seen war, have seen families broken apart, have seen all these, modernization and longing for a better future, but constantly being set back. And going through these changes, and also the traditions undergoing, rapid change as well. And I just thought that in this Asian space, we deal with so many similar problems. And I think that's why on one hand, I feel like, oh, this is, I see a part of Vietnam now that I didn't know about before. And at the same time, I also feel a sense of kind of, solidarity, or a sense of just resonance, that I know this longing. I think for me, that's why I reacted very strongly to your film. And I thought, I wanted to hear a bit more about the 1980s Vietnam, because it was so interesting. I also read about, your musical career in New York, and previously, your goal to aim to become a theater actor. So what was Gai Lom in 1980s Vietnam? Because this was also a time of, I'm interested in hearing you describing that time when you grew up in Vietnam, and what Gai Lom meant for the society, for people. What kind of role did it serve in the society, and how, and the theater form, was it going through changes in that time? Because this, 1980s was a time when cinema, took off in China, right? Chen Kai-ge and other filmmakers in the 1980s started this Chinese new cinema. And so I felt, because I grew up in China in the 1980s, so I was also a theater fan too. And I had felt like in the 1980s already theater was fallen, was starting to fade, while cinema became really important and winning prizes, and because it was international, so it had, so almost, so I feel that in your film, the actors were also nostalgic. While they were performing in the theater, they were already nostalgic about it. And the protagonist, for example, said, oh, the theater, you are all speaking about ideals and longings and loyalty, but in real life, it's very different. So it's as if, the theater was already a bygone time, belonging to a bygone time where these values mattered, and now it's not. So I'm just very interested in hearing more about theater in that time. And also, I just want, the last thing I wanted to say is that I feel, Chen Kai-ge makes a film about theater because in China, theater and cinema were so intricately connected, from the very beginning. In Japan too, kabuki was very connected to cinema from the very beginning. And so I'm also very interested in thinking about, in Vietnam, how was theater and cinema connected in history, and also particularly in the 1980s?
Yes. Wow, that's a big question. I will try to answer it as much as possible with my knowledge, because in the 80s, the time frame that I picked for the film, that was the time that I was growing up in Vietnam. I was I was 13 when I left, but Cải Lương is already fading starting from the 90s. And as you know, the US embargo on Vietnam is not lifted until 1994, but around 89, 91, 89 to 90, that's when Hong Kong cinema, video, VHS, and other US films starting to come into Vietnam, and then that started the whole Cải Lương video starting to happen, and that's the beginning of how Cải Lương people stopped going to the theater, because for half of the ticket price of Cải Lương ticket, they could just go and rent a videotape, and the whole family could sit at home and watch Cải Lương, and therefore all of the Cải Lương artists was starting to make all of this, is a new wave, and they could make great money. So all of the Cải Lương was being filmed, and people just stopped going to the theater. So go back before that, because of the US embargo on Vietnam after the war up until the 90s, there's no other form of entertainment. And that is the reason why Cải Lương was having its second golden era, golden age, because there's nothing else to watch. Film was being very limited. As I remember, all we have are Russian films, what else? Slovakia films. So all of the Eastern Europe films, all the communist countries, we were able to watch those movies. And it's still very limited, because TV didn't start until 7 p.m. and it's finished at like 11 p.m. That's the only time of the day we had TV, and we just have to watch whatever we're being allowed to watch on TV. So therefore, and all of the music, the films prior to 1975 was banned. So we're not allowed to see or watch or listen to any of those. So Cải Lương was the only thing that people can go. And at the same time, the government was using Cải Lương just as the Chinese government used Peking opera as a way to a form of propaganda. So all of the so you can see in Song Lang, that's when the mother refused to perform those new wave type of shows. That's why her scene partner was wearing the costume, which is the black pajamas. That's the uniform of Viet Cong. So they were switching from performing costume. Chinese show were also banned in the 80s as well. So they were not allowed to perform any Chinese stories. Therefore, the mother decided to leave, which also what happened with a lot of Cải Lương artists from before 1975. After war, they decided to leave or to retire. So that's the era that I got to witness, but also because Chinese story were banned, it forces a new genre of Cải Lương, which is Vietnam historic stories were being used because people still have the need to, you know, have costumed show instead of, you know, modern day type of shows. So they're like, okay, well, we can't perform Chinese show, so let's try to find Vietnamese history. What can we do? So we have princesses and king and queens and all that, and that developed a new genre, which is tuồng lịch sử, which is history, cải lương, type of cải lương. And I was lucky that I was just born and lived during the time and get to witness the second and last golden age of cải lương, which is why I decided to choose to have the 80 as the time frame for the story. And also because from 90s, starting from the 90s and after, I just have no connection to it anymore. I left the country in 1990, and now going back, it's just not the same. Yeah, and that's also the reason why all of my upcoming projects that take place in Vietnam, it's all before, like the 90 is my mark, and I always go back to the past. I have no inspiration from what Vietnam aesthetically, you know, I have no desire to. It doesn't give me any inspiration to shoot.
All right, thank you very much again, and Leon for sharing a wonderful, beautiful film with us, and also John for organizing this great event. And then it's already a wonderful, great. It's good number of questions are arriving, and then I would like to be short here. But I sort of want to expand what Ron and In sort of initiated asking, and then I would like to talk ask a little bit about the nostalgia of this film. In addition to the Saigon in the 1980s, you know, that it's as powerful and visually stunning as characters. So Saigon in the 1980s is really serving as the yet another the protagonist in the film, and then also the fact that the character, the protagonist, is on the rooftop making reference about his own nostalgia to the childhood. And they're making this parallel, drawing a parallel between time travel and movie-going experience, which is also a very beautiful scene in the film too. And then on that very setting, that gorgeous simple board on the rooftop of the building. And then just after watching film, I couldn't resist this urge to sort of Google how Saigon looked like in the 60s and 70s and 80s and how it's changed, etc. And then your film is also, it's that you are reproducing, recreating Saigon in the 1980s, but at the same time, almost giving us sort of imaginary archive of, you know, yet again, another way of sort of kind of personalizing, subjectivizing the term nostalgia, as we were talking in many ways, and in and wrong, and all of us have a different parameter of that particular term. And then just wanted to sort of hear a little bit more about it. It makes sense that in this conversation, you are surrounded by vintage and old items with stories and histories, and then this making this connection to this gorgeous, again, the imaginary recreated visual archive of Saigon in the 1980s. I just wonder how the process of making this film was, especially in terms of you know, location shooting, and then the research process. And did you all collect those props and items by yourself, or did you work or collaborated with historians? Or no, I'm not necessarily interested in the recent literature, but it is still very interesting, since the 1980s in Saigon is very different from let's say pre-1975, because the fact that we have a different type of images circulated is not necessarily the foreign press circulating journalistic image, but rather it is more about perhaps vernacular snapshot of streetscape, etc. So I just wonder if you could sort of, it's intersection of personal memory and history as well too, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about the process of recreating Saigon.
Yes, so actually, because I picked 1980s, I didn't have to do much research. is all from my memories. I moved back to Vietnam in 2017, and I was there for 3 years during the making of the film. And during that time, I kept fixing the script and you know, get on my motorcycle and drive around, and things just start coming back. And as things start coming back, I start making changes to the script, you know, it's rather an interesting journey. As much as I hate using that word, but there, you know, for lack of a better word, it was a journey going back, because all of this memory that I didn't think about, it just started popping out of nowhere. Like one day, you know, you drive down the street and it's like, oh my gosh, my mom used to do this. And then it led to, like, when she do this, she would wear this. And, you know, like, what would she do? How would she walk? And then, you know, sitting, I rented an apartment in Vietnam that looks like Dũng apartment. And then I was like, oh, she used to use this spoon. This is the spoon that I had. Like, normally, you know, in New York, I would never able to sit at home and think about, like, oh, that's a spoon. I'm going to type it into my script. Those kind of things that I can't think of. But then when you go back there, you being there, being in the scene, it just start coming back to you. And it was a powerful experience. And also the things that people say, the words, you know, I couldn't sit in my New York apartment and think of, like, oh, use that word. That's how people would say it, because I want to make it as authentic as possible, even though the film is not a documentary, and it's not a super realist film like Nomadland. It's still a poetic nostalgia revisit in my mind of a child of 1980s of Vietnam. There's a romantic sense that I fused into the look of the film. So it doesn't have to be supposed to be like real, but I still try to have the element that could connect with people. Especially the hard thing is we have a very tiny budget. So we're not going to be able to show the street of Vietnam in the 80s and so people can look at it and say, oh yes, I know this is 80s. So I have to find that, okay, within this frame, we're not going to have a lot of exterior. We're not going to have a lot of big scene and street scenes. How can we make people feel that this is their Vietnam in the 80s? And so I just have to look within. And I was like, well, how would I feel? And it's kind of strange, but I just picture myself in a frame. And I was just thinking like that, you know, it's like, what in this that makes me feel like I was back home? And in order for me to find things, I just have to, like, close my eyes, like, go back, really traveling back. And that's how I came up with the line of Linh Phụ on a rooftop as well. Like, things make you travel back in time. A lot of people say, oh, that's a little bit, you know, corny, but that's how I really think. So maybe I am corny because in real life, I did think like that, you know, because those things really took me back. And I really, in order to do it with the, within the budget that we had, I had to find a way to do it like that. And actually, you know, of course, with one of the more challenging thing when things get real, when you actually go out and trying to find all of these props and location, it was a huge challenge because Vietnam is completely different now. There's only like a small area or district, mostly in District 5, where we film most of the film, which is the Chinatown district, that still remain intact. But everything else is demolished. We could not find a theater. Before 1975, there was about 250 theaters, also Cải Lương Theater. Nowadays, there's less than 10, and maybe only 5 of them are in a condition that you can actually walk in without, things fall on your head. And we were finally able to find an authentic Vietnamese cải lương, an opera theater to use. We used 2 theaters for the film, one for the interior and one for the exterior, because the one with the exterior, the interior has been demolished, and the one with the interior, the exterior has turned into a cafe, because neither of them are being used for its original function anymore, and it's just being abandoned. And as you know, Vietnam film industry is still not what Hollywood is. We don't have prop houses, so we just have to go, and literally I was on Facebook typing who has the plastic, the little plastic toy that they were throwing on the street. It's like throwing dart. Those are the things that I played in Vietnam when I was a little kid during the 80s. That was big. And I was like, how do we find this? So I went on Facebook and I typed in like, does anyone have these game that I used to play with this? And then someone had it, someone collected, and we went and he loaned it to us so we can use in the film. And so we just go about like a lot of things like that happen to pull the film together. And of course, I have a wonderful, wonderful production designing team as well. Phan and his team were great help.
So I want to pick up on a couple of questions that have been raised in the Q&A, because it was one that I also had. And it's something that you talk about as far as a strategy in thinking about this film in queer cinema. And that's holding back on developing physical intimacy between the 2 characters, that you wanted it. And again, I can see a lot of Wong Kar-wai in the way that the mise-en-scène is so sensuous. And I agree with you. I love this sense of the antiquing, as you said, of these kind of apartments, of the markings, the textures in these incredible spaces that kind of suggest a passion. But you deliberately didn't want to allow your 2 characters to really touch intimately or kiss, or no sex, no nudity, as you said. Is this a matter of censorship, or what was, I mean, for a Vietnamese audience, what is censorship like? This is raised in the questions, and I also had that question. Or how were you seeing this film being situated within a kind of global queer cinema? And I can't help but think that there are moments that feel very much like Moonlight, but in Moonlight, of course, they allow this kind of intimacy to develop, and you hold us back from that. Can you talk about that the choice that you're making there?
Yes. So if you've seen 2 of my short films, Talking to My Mother and Dawn, they were also gay themed films, and they also has no physical contact. They're kissing, but there's no nudity, and I deliberately holding back from the typical element you would see in gay films, because for me, I was trying to see if I could able to tell a gay love story without any of those elements. Because I feel like if I turn on Netflix or YouTube and I type in gay cinema, immediately all you see, all of the posters, at least one of the elements to capture the audience is either a really hot looking lead, and he has to be, and it's suggestive, like there's going to be good sex scenes, or that hot lead is going to be nude in the film. And I thought, well, what if I take all of those away? Can the audience still care about my character? Can I still able to capture the audience attention throughout the 15 minutes, the 20 minutes, or an hour and a half? So those were the challenges that I want to try for myself at the beginning. And why I choose gay theme film, I will get into that in a bit. But I'm not planning to be the only gay filmmakers. It just happened to be, there was a reason why I chose to make gay theme films at the beginning, at the start of my filmmaking journey, because I'm trying to avoid a career. I'm saying it's not really a career yet. I don't want to jinx it. But with Song Lang, actually, I had to fight tooth and nails with the producers to keep it the way it is, because at the final cut, they were forcing me to go back and add more scenes for the two main characters' touch. At first, they wanted to have a sex scenes. I'm like, how am I gonna put the sex scenes in there? We finished filming the film. We finished editing the film. Like, can it just be a dream sequence? I'm like, what? No. And then, so they negotiated down to like, can they just kiss? I'm like, okay, where can they kiss? Give me a good example. Where's a good spot for a kiss? I'm like, when they say goodbye, when they, at the window, you know, when they say goodbye, they could kiss. I'm like, no. So finally they're like, well, can it just like touch hands or something? So long story short, that never happened. I said yes, and I didn't do it. I used that money to do something else, to shoot something else for the film. But the reason with Song Lang, I don't want the two characters to touch, because the people that I still thinking about the most romantically, or doesn't even have to always be romantically, but the people who have passed through my life that I still thinking about and wonder about the most, other people I never really fully, completely reach whatever I wanted to go there with them. I never slept with them. I never touched them. I never kissed them, or whatever it is. The fact that I'm still wondering about them and thinking about it because it never happened. And it makes me, and I think about it more than the people that I actually slept with. I can't even remember the people that I slept with anymore, because, you know, so the moment when Dũng and Linh Phụng stand on the rooftop, or the moment, or when he turns over, and, you know, because he was facing out and he flipped over to be closer, the space between them closer, when Linh Phụng turns over, I remember those feelings. I had those nights with someone that I'm just, you know, like you just being this close to them, and it's so exciting. It's orgasmic just to be in the same, like you can feel the energy of that person. Or the moment they stand at the window saying goodbye. I had those moments. Standing next to someone that all of my hair stood up, just because, you know, I can feel the heat on my arm. Those are the moments I still remember about those people that I had those experiences with, versus I can't remember the people that actually have crazy sex with. Now I can't even remember. I don't want to think about it, or I can't remember about them anymore. But I can't forget those moments, that those people I can. So to me, it's already so clear that it's a love story. It's already so clear that they had a very deep connection. And also, I didn't want to, like, why does it have to be clear that it's gay or straight? Why can't it just be a love story? Why? And it's usually, what's interesting is always the gay audience that confronted me with such, you know, anger and frustration that, like, well, are they gay or not? Because they didn't touch. And I thought it was very interesting because like, so they have to touch for you to determine that that's a gay love story. That's that this is a love story. There's no other kind of love. So yeah, I'm rambling on, but
you are not. That is such a fantastic answer. That's all I'll say. Thank you. Really, such a rich answer.
Thank you. But I can't tell you how many gay audience like get so frustrated, and you know they send letters and they send tweet, and it's like, what is this? Are you afraid of being gay? Are you afraid of like, is your country, you know, not allow being gay? I'm like, no. And first of all, they only met one day. What kind of like, normally, and it's a romantic love, so of course they're gonna take their time. It happened maybe after, if you can go to the theater, and who knows, if you know, then maybe they're gonna happen. And but don't forget, it's only been one day, and right before that they were enemies. So what does it say about, you know, people forgot about romance.
This is really wonderful, and it's so great to hear how you answered this question. I guess there are also questions on the chat. Someone, I think Vin Nguyen, was asking about Song Lam as two double group. I mean, just kind of the meaning of Song Lam, and whether, I wonder if you want to comment on that. I mean, I also have other questions, but I thought this might relate to what you're talking about.
Yes, so Song Lang is the instrument that Jung was holding, that you see is a tap box thing that he put on under his feet to tap. And basically within Vietnamese traditional music, and especially the Cải Lương orchestra, whoever holds the song lang is the most important person. He basically the conductor of the band. And with that tap, it allows the musicians and the artists know when to come in, when to start, and when to end. And also he controlled the tempo and the phrasing of the songs. And when a song ends, there will be two tap, and then we know, and the musician knows that the song ends. And that's why when Jung dies, there was two song lang tap at the end when he dies in front of the theater. And also, it just happened to be Song Lang also mean two men. But Song Lang was always the theme of the film, because the two men was not the original idea for the film. Originally, it was a male and a female. And it wasn't until later on I decided to change it to a male-male relationship. And it just happened to be like, oh, it's perfect. It works for the title as well.
Yeah, no, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go. No.
Well, I just wanted to pose two questions, because especially on this topic that of the title Song Lang and the instrument. But first, I did want to mention, you know, your earlier comments about the mise en scène and the sort of reconstruction of 80s Saigon. I mean, it's amazing that there is an experience of time travel that you've accomplished, because those scenes that you have shot, although Saigon has changed so very much, there are timeless experience. Like when the two of them are on the motorbike, that could be yesterday, you know. And there's a kind of timelessness that then the sort of 80s experience of it is quite subtle in the background, but there is a kind of dazed sense of time that is really quite nice. I just really appreciated that very much. But on the topic of the the Samlang instrument, I wanted to ask you, because of course the film opens with dialogue about the instrument itself. And there is this very prevalent experience of the first half of the film with Jung's life. There's a kind of rhythmic experience of his daily life. And of course, he's sort of doing what he needs to do in the moment at any given moment. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about maybe if there is anything to the metaphor of the instrument and the rhythm that maybe, you know, that you were incorporating in those shots of his life, you know, from morning to you. We have such a sense of the schedule of Jung's life, yeah, and what he's looking for. You know, that's
right.
My...
The beat of the editing and the theme of the film. I also, as I mentioned, Song Lang was always the theme of this film. Before even Dũng and Linh Phụng even come into the story, because Dũng and Linh Phụng didn't come into the story until like the last couple of years of the script. But before that, we have like 5 years of different storylines, and one of the storylines was Dũng mom was the lead character, you know, a cải lương performer who fled and then returned, and the theater was being demolished, and she wanted to put the final performance together at the theater where she used to perform and all that. So so the beat of Song Lang and you know what kept the moral path of the artist, that has always been the theme of the film, of the core story. And I just tried to incorporate it into the new version of the story as we went along. And so, yes, it's correct. With the editing, I want to show that, you know, before he met Linh Phụng, his life was different pace. And as the moment he met Linh Phụng, he's slowly being pulled back into this world of cải lương. And as he mentioned at the beginning, my life has been missing this familiar beat for a long time. The Song Lang beat so the moment that he stepped back into the theater and then meeting Linh Phụng, as he being pulled back to the life of theater, a life of art, to the core of his being, things starting to go into a different path, and it's more structure, it's calmer. It's more romantic. And as his, if you pay attention, I mean, this is like just for me to know, and hopefully someone who liked the film eventually I can pick up. You can see his costume change as well. The material he wears, the color he wears. And after he met Linh Phụng, you know, he started wearing short sleeves, and the material is softer and the color is brighter. So he's starting to transforming. To me, it's kind of like, it is a story of Beauty and the Beast in a way. You know, like Linh Phụng is the beauty, and and Dũng is the beast. He has, you know, he was a prince that being turned into, life has turned him into this beast. And you know, meeting Linh Phụng, starting to peel off all of these layers and revealing who he truly are. So yes, with the editing, I was trying to convey that as well, and give the audience that feel of like what the character is going through. And then, you know, because the film is go through Dũng eyes.
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna bully myself to allow myself to follow up with just one more question on that point, and then I think we'll open things up more intentionally to the Q&A box.
Yes.
But on that note, you know, going back to the point that Gregg made earlier in your response about the electricity of longing, you know, like by the way, I just love that shot of the two of them in the window, you know, and it's their elbows are touching, and you can almost feel that sort of static, you know, like it's really incredible. But you know, obviously there's a strong sort of there's a kind of braiding of Mi Zhou, Jiang Tui, Dũng, and Linh Phụng, and I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because it seems like from the outside that sometimes the correspondences are shifting as to who is who, or as to what role what person is playing. I just was wondering how, if you could talk more about the use of that particular historical story as a backdrop for Ling Feng and Zum's story.
Yes. So originally, actually, it's not that deep. It might disappoint you. But originally, well, so there's two elements to it when I to choose which opera to use for the film. So first of all, it has to be a colorful show. It has to be a costume show. So there's a contrast, so we can see for the audience to see the contrast, and visually it's more stimulating for the audience to see a contrast between the stage and the life, right? So that established, like, okay, I need to pick a story that, you know, there's fairy and princess or whatever. So there's a transformation for Ling Feng on stage and Ling Feng in person. And also within the story, there has to be a tragic ending, because I knew I already established the ending for Jung. So, and I knew that I want the third act, it's going to be parallel on stage and outside of the theater. So I was like, okay, so the story has to be a tragic ending on stage, a period piece. And then it has to be easy for the audience to understand within a very few scenes, you know, because we can't show a whole opera. And like, okay, this is how it has to be something that, oh, with this, oh, they fall in love, and then an obstacle, and then, you know, a tragic ending. And at first it was, the one I picked was Ngu Lang Chức Nữ. Those of you who don't know the story of Ngu Lang Chức Nữ, it's a fairy came down on earth and falls in love with a peasant. And then, you know, her fairy godfather and mother came down and separate them. And every year during the raining season, they would get to meet once in the sky by all of these what should I call it?
Magpie.
Birds or whatever that would create this bridge, so heaven and earth would join and they would meet in the middle. So I'm like, okay, so that, but then it's like, oh shoot, that means Ling Feng for the whole entire time on stage, he will look like a peasant in, like, you know, this brown outfit, you know. And I already established the image of, like, after the show, when Jung meets Ling Feng backstage, and Ling Feng now stands higher on him. He stands on stage, and Jung is walking in. And I knew that I want, now the dynamic has shifted, because earlier, the first time they met, Jung was, you know, the powerful one, destroying the theater, right? Destroying this world. But now at night, when this theater world is in its power, the most powerful, the most magical, Jung is nobody. He cannot use his power to destroy anything, because, you know, it's magical. And so he outnumbered here. And so he walks in and he has to see, now Ling Feng is a new vision of art, that Jung feels so small and so out of it. And the hurtful part is, this used to be his world, and now he's no longer a part of it. So I'm like, well, that'd be weird if Ling Feng stood there in the peasant clothes. So I'm like, okay, I have to find another story that Ling Feng has beautiful. So, and then I remember, it's like, oh, you know, Chồng Thủy Mỹ Châu is a great story. Is a very well-known Vietnam legend. And it has, you know, then Ling Feng will be a beautiful prince, and it's easy to understand. If you're a foreigner and you don't know the Vietnamese legend, you will see that, oh, there's a princess falls in love with another prince from another country, and, you know, it's a scheme and betrayal, and, you know, one dies, and then lovers met, and then the end. So that's when I switched over to Zhong Tui Mei Zhao. And also I had to rewrite all of the opera or the lyrics because it needs to match what's happening in real life. So I have to find a way to like try to minimize to use the character's name in the opera as much as possible, because if that mentioned, I'm like, oh, well, then who's Zhong Tui, who's Mi Zhao, who's Yong, and who's Ling Feng? So I'm like, so I try to take it out as much as possible, and you know, it lost a lot in the English translation. I think it's more, it's definitely has more, it ties in much tighter in Vietnamese. For example, when Mi Zhao and Ling Feng saying goodbye to each other, everything Mi Zhao says is basically what Ling Feng feels when he said goodbye to Yong at the window. And at the death scene, when he was singing to the body of Mi Zhao in his arms, all of those also exactly what Ling Feng feels and what's happening outside in the theater as well. And you know, and a lot of people like analyze and suspect that there's political motive behind, and like it's not that deep.
That's great. So we have so many questions. I do want to give the panel last, you know, if anyone wants to follow up before we move to the question and answer. All right, so I'm going to pose two questions at once for you, Leon. They're kind of more focused questions, and then you can respond to those two in a row, and then we'll pick another question for you. So the first question is from Professor Hui Tam Ho Tai from Harvard. She asks a question about, she writes, what made you choose a scene from Lu Bo Hi Liu Tuyen, which is more often associated with hat bowling? That's a very specific question. And then the second question, there's several questions that focus around the sort of Catholic imagery, and sort of inviting you to speak more about the use of Catholic imagery in the film in general.
Yes, with the Lu Bo Hi Liu Tuyen, as Ying might know, is a very famous Chinese story. That's the scene when the flashback of Yong's mom performing on stage. That's a very famous Chinese story that being used in Gai Lung before 1975. Everybody knows that show. Everybody knows that story. So I decided I want to show, as I mentioned, because we don't have the budget to show the timeline as clear as, you know, big scenes. So I'm trying to give as much hint as possible and squeeze it in every little, you know, pockets of the story. So if people, you know, able to pick it up, they're like, ah, that makes sense. So I wanted to do a Chinese show before 75 because that's the most popular of Gai Lung during that era. So then when I go to 1980s, then we can see the difference between like, oh, they're not allowed to perform Chinese story anymore. Now they're doing propaganda shows, Viet Cong story, you know, and also folk leading is a very well-known story that also attached to Thanh Nghe, you know, and Phung Ha. So I feel like if you know, there's many other Chinese story that are being used as well, but I feel like, especially for the Vietnamese audience, when you see a person with the pheasant feather, you know exactly who it is. And you see, you know, the guy Dong Jia with a big belly, with a beard, like, oh, so, you know, the people don't have to think like, oh, what show is it they performing? So that's the reason. About a Catholic image. Well, basically, I just want to show that also, beside the fact that obviously I want to use it to show Jung is the person who has no belief. He lost in life. He's a lost soul. He doesn't believe in anything. Life has betrayed him, so he didn't trust anything anymore. And I also want to use the opportunity to show that you know, Vietnam is not only a Buddhism country. It's also very have a huge, a strong Catholic community as well, and but it doesn't matter which. When you're lost, and when you want to grab hold onto something, like Jung, he just doesn't believe in anything. It's not that he doesn't believe in Jesus or he doesn't believe in Buddha. He just doesn't believe in anything. So he goes there because these two little girls, they mentioned it, and that's their belief. He went there because of them. He went there for them. And he would do whatever the people in church do in effort to whatever he can do at that moment to minimize the damage that he have done. So that basically the reason that I picked that.
Thank you so much. We have so many good questions. I'm going to ask you two again at the same time, if that's all right. The first question is, a couple of our audience members, Frank Prashan and Celia Bouile, have asked about the bury your gays trope, and they would like you to talk a little bit more about your ending, specifically having Zoom die, the sort of tragedy of the gay relationship. So could you speak a little bit about that in general? Maybe that one's enough. I'll hold off.
Yes, gladly, because I've seen so many questions about this, and I never really had a chance to answer this particular question. I never see it as a tragic gay ending, because the story is not about them being gay. It's a story about two people, and this goes back to the question earlier that Ron has about the gay theme as well. I don't look at this as a gay film. They like the gay issue was never an issue. It was never an issue between the characters. It's not about them not being able to come out, or it's not about them hiding their sexuality from each other or from the world. They're just two people be. So therefore, that ending is not about a gay ending, a gay tragedy that waiting because you are gay. No, Jung dies because he pays a debt as a human being that he has to pay. Has nothing to do with that he's gay, and he may not be gay. Ling Feng may not be gay. You know, they could be just two people in sync. There could be soulmate, or they could fuck their brains out tomorrow if Jung's still alive. Who knows? Who cares? That's not the point of the film. So to me, it was never a gay tragic ending. They didn't being punished for being gay. Jung has a debt that he has to pay. Just because he paid some cash to pay off the debts to the little children's father, that if we can all buy our sins out that easy, then, you know, we all could commit crime and just throw money at problems, right? Jung has, you know, he has many sins. And also, to me, that ending is not tragic. Jung ended up where he wanted to be. He died happy. And if you notice, the angle that he dies and his expression is exactly the same angle and the expression Ling Feng has on the bed the next morning when Jung wakes up and looks at Ling Feng. The you know, the happiness, the serenity, the joy, that's what's been missing in Jung's life. And as he died, he was able to get there. He achieved that. when he was looking at Ling Feng, maybe it's lust, oh, he's hot. Or maybe it's just like, you know, this like happy person, this artist, that who I could have been. But I stray so far away from it. That's the look. And of course, you know, because Ling Feng possess all that, because Ling Feng represent all of that, there's also love between the two of them, from Jung for Ling Feng. And Ling Feng, Jung's death is the best gift he can ever give to Ling Feng. You know, that never knowing what happened is gonna help Ling Feng fly. And it's gonna, you know, as I mentioned, if they sleep together, maybe things are gonna get sour. Maybe it's gonna be boring after. They're gonna hate each other. But because once again, he did not show up, just like his parents did, that's gonna haunt him for the rest of his life, right? That's the best gift ever. It hurts now, but it lasts for a lifetime, and he gets so much more out of it. So.
What a beautiful answer. I hadn't thought of that, you know, the idea of his death being a gift is really quite beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not a gay, tragic ending. And not being punished for being gay.
Right. It's on tape now. So the, two other questions that are popping up, general, but I think very interesting. One, you mentioned the color in terms of costume, and this student is asking. Her name is Lexis. She's asking about your concept of color in general, particularly as it might relate to nostalgia. Did you have a color scheme associated, you know, to evoke that? And I'm just going to go ahead and ask the second question. The second question is broadly by Vincent Guo, another student. What do you find is lost in translation as far as the film being consumed by non-Vietnamese speakers? What do you think is the thing that is the hardest to be communicated? So those are the two questions.
The first question, in terms of color scheme, one of the main characters of the film is the theater and Saigon. And we didn't create that. That's how it is. We did do some renovation to the theater. We repainted, and of course Jung's apartment. You know, we trying to match the color that the closest to what I envisioned. But basically, the rest of it, that's how it looks. We didn't touch it. That's how the city looked. So me and the production team, we just have to go off of what is already have for us. So we pick the location. That stairway is blue. We like that stairway of Jung's apartment. Now we have to find a way to incorporate it to what would work with that blue. And there's one thing in terms of if we're talking about color that I really wanted, that's the color red. If you pay attention, they're almost like a piece of red everywhere in the film. First of all, to me, red is the epitome of Cải theater. That's what stand out in my mind. Is like, and when you read the book about, when they talk about theater in Vietnam, it's always about the red curtain open. It's never like the blue curtain opens, right? It's always the red curtain. It's drama. It's operatic, right? And so it's also the color of blood, right? So we know that something's dramatic is going to happen. And so if you pay attention, there's always a hint of red everywhere, because as it ties into the theme of the film, when live and stage collide. Jung Live is just as operatic. That's why he has that operatic ending, because almost, unless it's a comedy, every Cải Lương show has a huge dramatic ending with someone dies. And a lot of people, I always find interesting that, especially people in Vietnam, in a society like Vietnam at the moment, it's so chaotic, right? Shit like this, Dũng, the way Dũng dies, so sudden, it happens every 5 minutes on the street of Vietnam. And nowadays, you know, in America, we are just as chaotic as, you know, if not more. So I always like, when people like, why does he die so sudden? I'm like, he could get hit by a car that sudden. We can't plant things in life, right? To me, there's nothing sudden about it. There's so many, and especially during the time of making the film as well, there's so many crazy things like that happen, especially in Vietnam. There's so many tragic, crazy things that just happen like that. We don't have time to prepare for our ending, right? Like, to me, there's not, and there's nothing sudden about it. It's when you're not prepared for it, but that's basically life. And to me, because maybe I'm very dramatic, but I think that if you people always being labeled as like, oh, so dramatic, but I feel like actually in life things are very tragic, shit that happen all the time. It's just as tragic or more tragic than an opera. I don't know whether you guys don't see it. I certainly live in Vietnam. I see tragic things happen all the time. So that's the first question. What's the second? I forgot.
Well, thank you for another really extremely rich answer. The second question was about translation. What might be lost in translation? What do you think is the most difficult to communicate or might be lost on audiences who are not Vietnamese speaking?
A lot of the politics. I think if you don't know, if you don't live in Vietnam, you're not gonna able to pick up all of the little hints of politics. And also, I also mentioned this many times, especially in interviews like this, because they might be being viewed in Vietnam as well. That I'm not a politician. I have no interest in politics or making a political statement. But the politics I put in the film is to help people see the timeline, the time that the film takes place in. Especially, you can take politics out of art. Politics directly influence and change and inspire art all the time, no matter what culture you're in, no matter what time, what year, what era it is. That's always the case. At least the art that you know has something to say, right? The art that changed people's lives, the art that make people feel and connect. It's always being affected by real life, right? And real life is affected by politics, especially a country like Vietnam. You can't say that, oh, just make it real, just make something people can connect with, and not allow me to say anything or to show anything that has a hint of politics in it. I'm not making politics to make a statement in terms of making judgment. I'm just saying, this is what happened, therefore, this happened because of that. And especially Cải Lương, an art form like Cải Lương, the way it changes, the way it modify and grow and with time, it's all because of politics as well. So how can I tell a truthful story and all of the characters being affected by what happened with the country as well? Yung's mother would never leave if it was not for the war. And if she didn't leave, then Yung would never be the way he is. And Cải Lương didn't have to change from not performing folk knitting to performing something else. And Cải Lương would never have Cải Lương history, Vietnamese history, Cải Lương historic stories if it wasn't for, you know, the war. So I cannot not tell a story with and being tied and not allowed to say anything. But luckily, you know, we were able to find a way that tell the story and not offend the government and still be able to pass with censorship. So that's, I think, one of the most one of the biggest thing that you can miss if you're not knowing the language. And second of all, I guess it's the dialogue. You know, there's only so much of the English translation we're able to convey, because there's certain way of speaking, a certain way of you know, slang words and stuff that doesn't make any sense in English that we just have to deal with. But it's also the way people speak in the 80s is not the way people speak in 2020. So with that alone, with the dialogue alone, will help people like, oh, this is the 80s. Yeah, I think that's the two big things. And of course, you know, the Cải Lương lyrics is, it's, to me, is so beautiful. And it's even more beautiful in this film because I wrote them.
Thank you so much. We just have a few minutes. I want to give the panel a chance to ask any last questions they might have before we close. We also have endless questions in the Q&A box as well.
I'll pass it over to Ying and Takuya.
I think there have also been questions in the Q&A asking about the Vietnamese American experience, you know, being kind of a filmmaker working in both spaces. And when I heard you talking about, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, being gay doesn't have to, you know, involve certain kind of markers or, you know, I think this you know, willingness to have uncertainty and to, you know, not to quickly classify, you know, also comes from, you know, experiences of moving between. And so, yeah, I'm wondering if you could comment a bit about, you know, being in America and, you know, as a Vietnamese American or Asian American filmmaker in relation to your work.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of double down in point to sort of ask your sort of future projects and also the positioning and Song Lang and your future future films in a global film industry and its context. And then your name appears when we Google in Japanese language, for instance, a lot of hits, just to let you know. So it's already happening, but I just wanted to hear more from your own. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. So to answer Ying's question, with the making of Song Lang, I am now completely so proud to be Vietnamese, which something is not something I shamefully I could not say few years ago. Not that I was ashamed of being Vietnamese, but I wanted to be American because I'm in an industry that being reminded every day that if I was not who I am, I would have so much more opportunities. If my English was perfect with no accent, if I just look a little more white, oh my gosh, my opportunities and my possibility would be endless. But going back to Vietnam, working on this film, and being reminded that how wonderful it is to be Vietnamese and to have this beautiful culture, to be proud, and I think the main thing is like, whatever you try, it's never gonna go away. I can try to be as white as I want to be. I can try as hard. I could try to speak English as perfect as I can. But at the end of the day, I'm still gonna secretly want to eat something with fish sauce. I would never be completely American because I need my fish sauce. Unless I deny myself that. And why would I do that? Because it's fucking delicious and it's in my blood. I could listen to musical theater, I can try to sing, I can do it perfectly, but at night I would still secretly go to my room and listen to my cải lương. And it makes me feel so complete. Why am I ashamed of that? And so making this film, it makes me realize that more. And now, it's a wonderful feeling. I could not care less if I don't speak perfect English. If I could not care less if I you know, now it's a scary time to be an Asian in America, obviously, but fuck it. Like, this is how I look, deal with it. You know, I have so much to offer just as who I am. And one, like, the important thing is, like, it's in you. You can't deny it. That's one thing that I realized. And with that, with my future projects, my priority will always be, as when I started with my filmmaking journey as well, as you see in my past two films, I want it to be at least an Asian film with a lot of Asian talents. If I get a better control at it, I want to give it as much opportunity to tell a story about my country as much as possible. Hollywood doesn't need another director like me to do Kong versus Godzilla. But Vietnam, I could help to tell. There's many more interesting stories in Vietnam that need to be told that I think the world would love to hear. It's very interesting, it's very beautiful, it's very unique as well. So if I'm gonna waste so much time and energy and my youth into tell a story, a film takes forever to make, why don't I do something at the same time, one stone with two birds? Do something for my country as well. Help give them voice, you know, help them show it to the world as well. So those are the things that I really, my check mark every time I start a project. And it's not a forcing myself to do, because I get so much inspiration from it as well. And that leads to Takuya's question about my upcoming projects. I'm working on two films. They both take place in Vietnam. One is 1970s in Vietnam. One is 1980s. The one in 1970 is about Vietnam, and it takes place in Vietnam and Central Africa. And it's based on a true story. And the one in 1980s is actually inspired by my living situation in Vietnam during the making of Song Lang. And it was inspired by the neighborhood I was living above in this little apartment complex. And so yes, it's continued to be a story about Vietnam and the Vietnamese people. And I guarantee you it's very unique. It's not a Chinese story, it's not a Thai story, it's not a Korean story. It's a very much Vietnamese story. It might look like Wonka Wai, but no, it's still Vietnam. Come to Vietnam, you'll see.
I think that's an excellent note to end a really exciting conversation on. So let's all take a minute, however you can, to thank Leon and all of our panelists for such a lively conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leon. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Leon and John.
And thank you, everyone, for participating in our event. Please take care and stay safe.